Hello everyone. Today for my Literacy Instruction for Students with Disabilities project, I'm going to be talking to you about semantic feature analysis. And if you're thinking, Julia sounds sick, that's because she is sick. Let's get into it. So what am I going to tell you about semantic feature analysis? We're going to go through what it is and how to do it, the theoretical foundations for it, its strengths according to research, the implications for teaching, ways educators have expanded upon it, and future research needs for this topic. This quote is from the first source I pulled for this project, and this is the foundation of what SFA is about. Practically speaking, there is no such thing as an identical synonym. No two words have exactly the same range of meaning. SFA is an interactive, experiential vocabulary instruction strategy. And I like to say it's the less popular sibling of semantic mapping. If you look at the top right there, you'll see an example of semantic mapping, which is probably something you've done in school before, drawing a concept map that connects vocab words together. Below that, you'll see a semantic feature analysis relationship chart. While semantic mapping uses a relationship map or web to explore similarities between words or concepts, semantic feature analysis uses a relationship chart or matrix to explore the differences between words or concepts. Semantic mapping gets named a lot more in the literature than semantic feature analysis, which we'll get into a bit more later, but they operate off of the same sort of principles. In a semantic feature analysis relationship chart, the rows are vocabulary terms, also referred to as the subordinate concepts, and the columns are features of those terms, or the superordinate concepts. In each box, the relationship between the two concepts is represented with a symbol like a plus or minus, or a number on a scale. The superordinate concepts are sometimes called the coordinate level concepts, but we're just going to stick with calling them the superordinate concepts because it's easier to remember. So, how's it done? Well, first, the teacher compiles a list of the words to be studied. And in order to compile this list for a content area topic, the teacher has to complete a content analysis. Basically, that's a process in which the teacher determines which ideas are relevant to an overall understanding of the content and which are isolated details that can be deleted. This may be vocabulary words of the same category or a list of important terms and concepts from the content the students are learning. So like the category of shelters would include cabin, mansion, tent, etc. And on the right over here we have a relationship chart on the topic of Fourth Amendment rights. Second step, you designate the superordinate and subordinate terms and organize them into a relationship chart. If your list is vocabulary words of the same category, they would become the subordinate terms. The superordinate terms will be features that are shared by some, but not all of the words. If your list is important terms and concepts from the content, the words that represent the biggest ideas will become the superordinate terms, and the words that represent details related to the superordinate terms will become the subordinate terms. Then you introduce the terms to the students, giving them simple definitions of the terms if necessary, depends on the content being taught. Then you lead a discussion with the students about the terms and the relationships between the terms. You have them connect prior knowledge and experiences to the terms. And if the content calls for it, have students suggest more superordinate and subordinate terms. In this case, with the chart I have on the right, students may add the superordinate terms stationary and sleeping space, and the subordinate terms apartment and mobile home. Then you fill in the relationship chart as a class by attempting to reach consensus on each relationship. Encourage students to justify why they decided on a certain relationship rating. And if the content calls for it, have students read the assigned text that relates to the content of the chart and adjust their charts accordingly. The initial terms ratings on this chart I have on screen are from Johnson and Pearson, the same book I quoted earlier, but the additional terms ratings were decided by me. You might disagree with me, or you might disagree with Johnson and Pearson, and that's all right. Students' final relationship charts may not be the same because they're thinking deeply about the connections between different concepts, and they will interpret them differently based on their unique knowledge bases. That is the basic procedure for this, and it can be adapted in a ton of different ways. But now we know the framework for it. What is the theory behind SFA? So the big thing is schema theory. Schema theory is this psychological theory that states that knowledge is structured in memory in hierarchical groupings called schemata. Schemata are important for interpreting incoming information from the senses, retrieving information from memory, and various other facets of processing in the brain. And then we have a related concept called the knowledge hypothesis. And the knowledge hypothesis is basically understanding a concept or knowing a vocabulary word implies that one knows not only the definition, but also its relationships to other concepts and its semantic characteristics. And on first glance, that may seem like a no-brainer. Like, yeah, if you know a word, you don't just define the word. You know what it means in relation to other words. But it's actually pretty important for the instructional implications of interactive teaching strategies. If a student doesn't have understanding beyond just the definition of the word, their understanding is shallow and won't serve their learning. This deeper understanding of relationships and semantic characteristics happens naturally to a degree, but the educator needs to foster it in learning activities when a student shows a deficit in it. So from these two concepts, we can derive the degree to which an activity activates prior knowledge and the amount of prior knowledge a student has both affect content learning and text comprehension. And instruction should provide opportunities for students to develop relationships between and among concepts. Earlier I said that semantic feature analysis is interactive, experiential, and strategic. What do I mean by that? So, strategic. Strategy instruction gives students tools to organize and reflect upon their thinking. This could be a ton of different things. It could be giving them a framework for mapping information. It could be giving them a checklist for revising their writing, etc. Strategic instruction promotes independence and generalizability. Generalizability meaning that the skills can be transferred to other tasks, settings, content areas, and strategy instruction is highly effective for students with disabilities. People with working memory and executive function issues, their metacognition, their reflection on their own thinking can be hindered. So students with learning disabilities benefit a lot from strategy instruction. Experiential. Schemata have more integrity when they are firmly rooted in experiences. I really like this one quote from my sources. One of education's hazards lies in the way in which words are learned. Often they are floating items unattached to real experience, and as a result, the knowledge is merely verbal. The shell of meaning is there, but the kernel is missing. That sounds a lot like the stuff I said about the knowledge hypothesis on the last slide. We need to have depth to our word knowledge, and for us to be able to access that depth and word knowledge, we need to learn about them through experiences. Now, interactive. Instead of just gaining information from the text, it is a constructive process of using cognitive strategies to combine information from the text with students' hypotheses about what the content will be and schemata. And in interactive instruction, you have mediated discussions that entail activating prior knowledge, utilizing cooperative knowledge sharing, tying new knowledge to old knowledge, predicting and justifying meanings and relationships among concepts, confirming and integrating understanding, and learning concepts in relation to content contexts. The body of research for semantic feature analysis specifically is small, but there is an abundance of research on interactive and experiential vocabulary instruction strategies. Most of what I found on research supporting SFA is from these two women, Anders and Boss. In their 1986 article, they talked about some of their previous research, talked about how in 1984 they were involved in this study where high school students with learning disabilities demonstrated significantly more content area vocab and significantly better reading comprehension. And what they did in that study is the students participated in an SFA activity before and immediately after reading a chapter on the Fourth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution. And their results were far better than the control group, who looked up difficult words and wrote the definition in a sentence for each one. And then 6 months later, they had a follow-up where the experimental group maintained their advantage. And then in a third study, they found high school students with learning disabilities performed significantly better when important words were learned through SFA rather than through oral recitation practice. And then in their 1990 article, they discussed their 3-stage research agenda on interactive teaching and learning strategies. The students they studied were upper elementary bilingual students with learning disabilities and middle school students with learning disabilities. In stage 1, the researchers served as the teachers, and in stage 2, the techniques were implemented by special education teachers, and the researcher implemented and teacher implemented lessons showed similar effect sizes. And in stage 3, teaching strategies were modified so students would use interactive learning strategies in cooperative learning groups. Interactive learning strategies being student-led, while interactive teaching strategies are teacher-led. Significant gains in content knowledge were shown and maintained, but respondents rated poorly on conditional strategy knowledge. Conditional knowledge refers to knowing when and why to select different cognitive and metacognitive strategies. So a student with high conditional strategy knowledge will show more success in independent strategy use and in generalization. And now research supporting related approaches. So first, Duffelmeyer. Duffelmeyer's whole deal is experiential vocabulary learning. And in his 1980 article, talked about teaching difficult words to college freshmen through skits and how that proved more effective than a traditional approach. So experiential, building an experience in the classroom that gives the students something to attach that vocabulary word to. And a thing I've noticed in reading articles that discuss related strategies is that they often give recommendations for adaptation that amount to an activity that is very similar to semantic feature analysis. Like Duffelmeyer's 1985 article, he reported success with a positive and negative instances strategy in which students are guided to compare and contrast related verbs in a way that is very similar to semantic feature analysis. It's structured like an example and non-example activity. That means the teacher and then the students give examples and non-examples of the target word. But then they use that to take a deeper look at the terms. And then we've got Foyle and Albert in 2002, and their whole article was about secondary level vocabulary instruction through drama, semantic mapping, video technology, the keyword method, and active student responding activities. And all of those interactive types of instruction proved effective. And they recommend that the teacher lead a semantic mapping activity that encourages both vertical, breaking down a concept into categories, and horizontal, differentiating concepts from other related concepts, expansion of vocabulary words. So basically, they recommended building on your semantic mapping activity with a contrasting function in addition to the comparison function, which is the goal of semantic feature analysis. SFA has been adapted in various ways, and here are some examples of named frameworks that people have proposed building off of the SFA process. So first we've got semantic syntactic feature analysis, which was presented by Allen in 1985, and in this, the students go through the normal SFA process, but they also complete closed sentences that require the use of the chart. And a closed sentence is a fill-in-the-blank sentence, and it often presents options for each blank. This provides students with an opportunity to apply their word knowledge in a concrete way. It also provides teachers with a more objective method of tracking student progress, as the charts are, to an extent, subjective. Then we've got subject area vocabulary reinforcement by Steiglitz and Steiglitz. It reinforces essential content area vocabulary, and it's best used as a culminating activity. And in its subordinate terms are from the same class, like planets. So this is a method of using SFA that was hinted at before, but basically you take a category of thing from your subject area content and you compare and contrast the features of that thing, and it can make a great review activity, it can make a great study guide. And that article really illustrated how easy it is to adapt SFA to any content area under the sun. And then we've got semantic analysis to writing. So comprehension questions about theme in a story assume that students have a definition of the given theme in their head and that they can find and integrate relevant details from the story with that theme to write their response. And for struggling readers, this can be really hard. And so the teacher creates an essay question about the story's theme and then generates a short list of synonyms and antonyms of that theme's key word. So like if the theme has to do with courage, then you might list bravery, moxie, bravado. So you have this list of related words to the theme, and then you have whole class and small group discussions to evaluate whether the teacher-generated words and additional student-generated words contribute essential characteristics of the theme, and the students dive into the text and find textual evidence for their claims. And then students use their notes from these conversations to formulate a concise definition of that thematic term. And then that becomes the opening paragraph of their essay about the theme. And I find that last one to be a particularly innovative use of the framework. So now, future research needs. What is the optimal delivery model for semantic feature analysis in an inclusion setting? An inclusion setting being where we have general education students and special education students being educated in the same classroom, because students with disabilities or who struggle with reading need explicit instruction, while high-achieving students can benefit much more from indirect, constructivist vocabulary instruction, in which they obtain meaning through context and morphological analysis. And how does semantic feature analysis differ when implemented with high-achieving students? SFA research has mostly been conducted with struggling students. Also, how can a teacher best leverage SFA in indirect vocabulary instruction, and how can SFA be combined effectively with other methods? And a different topic of research is bridging the research to implementation gap. How can we make a non-traditional teaching approach like this acceptable to teachers? Because teachers may not feel prepared or willing to interact with students' prior knowledge and link it to the content. They also may not feel that they have a firm enough grasp on the cognitive and metacognitive processes through which they need to help their students. Because this sort of approach can be very different from what teachers have been taught to do, ongoing, thoughtfully implemented professional development is required. So how can we train teachers to implement these strategies effectively? And also, how can we get struggling readers accustomed to this type of learning task? Low-achieving students and students with disabilities are often not challenged in school to think deeply and construct meaning in content domains, so they may resist an interactive approach at first, seeing it as too much work. But if they can be convinced to meaningfully engage with it despite that, they could find a great sense of self-efficacy in it. So let's recap. Semantic feature analysis is interactive, experiential, and strategy-focused, and it must include student discussion to activate prior knowledge and connect that prior knowledge to what they're learning. And SFA is a natural extension of various evidence-based approaches, and it is highly compatible with schema theory. It's also highly adaptable. It can be just for vocabulary learning. It can be for all sorts of different content areas. And I've got a little example down here of how to set it up in the most basic terms. You've got your subordinate terms on the side, which are vocab words, concrete details. You've got your superordinate terms on top, features of words or big abstract ideas. And where they intersect, you've got symbols representing each relationship. And here are my references. Boz and Anders pulled a lot of weight in this one, and I actually didn't end up referencing Recruit in this presentation, but I referenced him in my paper. And that is it. Thank you so much for watching, and have a wonderful day.